Please direct your attentions to the screen for a video from our summit partner, Kite and Key Media.
In 2011, a small town in western New York got national news attention when local high school students suddenly started shaking and stuttering uncontrollably. Aaron Brockovich even came to town, suggesting it might have been the result of a chemical spill from 40 years prior. And because the outbreak wasn't limited to a particular social group, these things usually are, it didn't look like a conventional MPI at first. A middle-aged nurse who had nothing to do with the school even reported symptoms. How? Because that nurse was following the town's news on Facebook. And that may be the future we're looking at. In 2022, a team of German psychiatrists introduced a new concept, MSMI, mass social media-induced illness. The biggest example of this, a dramatic spike in recent years in the number of teenagers presenting with what appeared to be cases of Tourette's syndrome. One problem, their behavior didn't actually track with the symptoms of Tourette's syndrome. What it did track with, however, was the behavior of some of the most popular Tourette's influencers on YouTube and TikTok. And the researchers suggested that teenagers, battered by the isolation and anxiety of things like COVID lockdowns, were simply channeling their unwellness into the kind of tics they were seeing modeled on social media. So, the bad news, vulnerable people around the world, and we are all vulnerable people at some point, are now one mouse click away from genuine suffering, actual symptoms, all rooted in the power of suggestion. But here's the good news. When people suffering a psychogenic illness are told what's happening, the symptoms tend to disappear. The twitchy cheerleaders and the online Tourette's cases, they got better. All of which means we've got to be careful in the digital era. Don't fall too far down the social media rabbit hole. Seek help if you're experiencing the isolation and anxiety that can lead to these illnesses. And whatever you do, for the love of God, please do not watch any Portuguese soap operas.
Please welcome to the stage co-founder and CEO of Kite and Key Media, Vanessa Mendoza.
Hi, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you so much for watching that short clip from my company, Kite and Key Media. It is a short piece of a longer video, which I hope you will take the time to look. You'll get the soap opera joke if you watch the complete video. I'm thrilled to be here with you today because we have an incredible, not just one, but two panels for you on social media and young adults that are in our lives. We are today watching the greatest transfer of information in the history of the world happening on social media. And we know that the connectivity that we have with each other, with our families, with people around the world can be really wonderful and helpful in our lives. But we also know that there's some bad things that can come from that too. And we are most concerned with the young adults in our lives as they're learning how to live and breathe in this digital world. So as I said, this is a two-part panel. The first part is going to be totally focused on social media and mental health for teenagers, and the second part is going to be focused on reforms, the role of government, and the tech sector as we think about these issues. So to start today, I'd like to welcome our first two panelists to join me on the stage. Join me in thanking them for being here. So I'd love, all the way to my left is Michael Kelleher, who is currently the Supervisor, Clinical Care in Hillsborough County Schools here in Tampa, Florida. HCPS is the 7th largest school district in the United States with over 220,000 students, over 250 schools. Mr. Kelleher helps to oversee the district mental health plan as well as threat management procedures. He is a school psychologist and a board-certified behavior analyst. And then directly to my left is Dr. Amy Quinn, who specializes in treating teen and adult anxiety, bipolar disorder, depression, and trauma. At Premier Psychology, Dr. Quinn provides individual couples and family therapy, in addition to being a trustee for the Naples Children and Education Foundation, a trustee for the Community School of Naples Board of Trustee member as well. So we're so thrilled to have you both here to help us navigate through these issues. So Dr. Quinn, I'm gonna start with you. So everybody, almost every American citizen here in the United States has some sort of social media platform that they utilize every day. But when we look at the teenagers, nearly 2/3 of teenagers report using social media every day, and 1/3 report using social media almost constantly. And I have to tell you, my personal experience tells me it's much larger than 1/3 that use it constantly. So my question to you to sort of kick us off is, one of the big concerns that people have about teenagers and their constant use of social media is whether or not there are mental effects from all that screen time, all that participation in online conversations. Is there any real link to depression or anxiety as it is often alleged?
Thank you. That's better, much better. First of all, I just want to thank you all for having me here. I'm really honored to be here, and I think that technology and mental health is an issue that policymakers and practitioners should really connect on and discuss together. And you know, the statistic that you mentioned, 13 to 17-year-olds, I think, are on social media about 3 hours a day is kind of the average. I think I read somewhere that teenagers check their phones 150 times a day. And you know, that's just for 13 to 17-year-olds. I would say that even 13 and under are using social media as well. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, but I also have 3 young children, my oldest being 11, and what I see from her peers is, you know, a lot of them are already on social media, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, and you know, the minimum age for these platforms is 13. So the fact that even children younger than 13 are on them is definitely concerning. You know, the excessive use of technology is, you know, not only affecting the increase in depression and anxiety, but it's also, you know, it's affecting the structure of our children's brains. And, you know, I have read that since the increase in social media usage and since social media has been accessible on smartphones, the rate of teen suicide as well as self-harm and hospitalizations for suicide attempts has increased dramatically since 2012. It's also increased dramatically not only for 13 to 17-year-olds, but for 10 to 14-year-olds. And you know, there was also a recent study put out there for you know, surveying, I think it was about 6,000 adolescents, and what was discovered, and these were all self-reports from adolescents aged 13 to 17, is that they are reporting that they're on social media about 3.5 hours a day. And the CDC recommends that, you know, or doesn't recommend, but kind of tells us that anything over 3 hours actually doubles your chances for, you know, having symptoms of depression and anxiety. So this is a huge issue, and it's definitely, you know, an increase in all of these, you know, risk factors for teenagers is definitely, you know, correlated with more access to social media. So.
Well, okay, that is such a scary picture. I mean, so many of us use social media accounts to educate ourselves, right? So, you know, my company, Kite and Key Media, we exist so that we can help people understand public policy issues the policy circle, does so many incredible things on social media. So we understand that the educational opportunity is huge, but thinking of it in the context that you just described, really necessitates us thinking about how we deal with this with our children. Now, Michael, let me ask you this. Given the fact that there are so many advantages to using some social media or digital media content to teach, in the context of what Dr. Quinn has just described, how do you balance those two things to give them the best of social media, but to ensure that it doesn't get to a place where we're thinking about these kinds of statistics?
Thank you. Great question. And first of all, thank you for having me here today. For me, I'm lucky. It was a short walk, 2 blocks from my office building to this great event. So I'm happy to be here. I work for Hillsborough County Public Schools in the district office, which is right up the road. So the dichotomy of social media is a challenge because on the one hand, there are so many advantages and benefits to that. In a district our size, getting information out to parents, to stakeholders, to community members, to the students themselves is a very powerful way to do that through social media. That is what everybody is using right now. So to empower and use positive messaging can be very powerful in that lens. One example of this is reporting also. If students notice signs and symptoms of their peers, because our students know the students the best, right? The adults, sometimes we think we do, but it's really the kids and the young adults that know each other. So we have several apps in the state of Florida, one being called Fortify Florida, that's anonymous reporting. If you've heard the term see something, say something, we promote that among students and faculty. We work with an organization called Sandy Hook Promise, and they were born out of the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012. They promote resiliency among students, reporting, noticing signs and symptoms from friends. So we try to do that in our schools too. We empower our students to notice a friend, to say hello to somebody that's struggling, and to have the appropriate people to report that too. Now on the flip side of that coin, the challenges with social media are well known. In our district, if they're using a district device, of course we monitor those types of things and make sure the web blocking and the app restrictions and things like that. But I think as educators and as adults in this society, I think that teaching our students what is appropriate and how to access those benefits is a challenge because it's something that's not going away. It's only going to become more prevalent. So I think that to meet that challenge is something that's very important and has to be thoughtful, and especially with the mental health piece of that.
Well, so let's talk for a minute about what is appropriate. So one of the things that everyone is very concerned about is social media addiction, right? So we started off talking about how frequently a teenager may pick up their phone. I know I pick up my phone a lot too. So what, Dr. Quinn, will you tell us in terms of signs or what the line is where something goes from casual, maybe even constant use, but actually now qualifies as an addiction or addictive behavior? What does that look like?
Right, so social media addiction is really similar to other types of addictions that we see clinically. Currently, there's not a DSM diagnosis for social media addiction. There is a diagnosis, however, for gaming addiction, and it's called gaming disorder. And so, similar to other kinds of addiction, gaming disorder addiction, the person is really preoccupied with gaming. They put gaming above other activities. They have a hard time, prioritizing other activities. Gaming becomes, their main priority. And, it's hard once you've kind of gotten into that place of addiction because it has to really take place over a long period of time. 9 to 12 months is really what we're looking at when we can classify it as addiction. However, you can look for kind of symptoms earlier than that to kind of see if there's any warning signs of your child or children actually, maybe getting to a point of addiction. Again, it becomes social media use, and checking the phone becomes a compulsion. It becomes something that it's hard for the child to not do. They need more time on it. As they get, as they continue to use it, they need more and more time on it to have the same effect. And there's really, it involves kind of activating dopamine pathways in the brain. So again, you need more and more of it to get the same kind of effect of dopamine release. And, one way that you can kind of look out for that is just seeing how children prioritize their use of social media, and then also looking for an increase in irritability, an increase in difficulty cutting back on it, even though they know that they should and they're being told that they should. It's just very hard to cut back on it. And there's also, you can look for kind of maybe a secretive nature of it. It's something that they do in secret. They really can kind of hide it from their parents, and that's another way to look out for some of the warning signs and get in there and kind of help to lessen the use and create boundaries around technology so that it doesn't get to the point of addiction and dopamine depletion.
So Michael, tell us, are you seeing this as a massive problem in the schools that you oversee, this form of addiction, such that it's requiring even additional kind of intervention or maybe needing to get parents involved?
So how I like to look at this is weighing stressors versus protective factors for our students. So our students have stress in life, yeah? Does anybody in the audience have any stress in life? Is anybody, I always say married or kids or things like that, but so yes, we all have stressors and we all have ways to cope with stress. Social media for our students is another stressor potentially, okay? If I do a lot of trainings, if you ever want to fill time in a training, you bring up social media, because you'll get participation from every single person in the room that has an opinion about that. So anxiety levels, depression levels, we've seen an increase, of course, since COVID and things like this. From the preventative lens, which is what I do, is trying to get in front of students so that they destigmatize their feelings and the insecurities they have around mental health. What I have seen encouragingly is more students coming forth for help, okay? More students seeking out trusted adults in schools and in the community, more students working with each other, whether it's in a club type of setting or a setting where they can interact. So I do see a positiveness in that direction. At the same time, though, I see that with the addiction that Dr. Quinn was talking about, it can become difficult. And when I'm talking with adults, I challenge adults also for adult behavior. Next time you're in a restaurant that's full, take a look around, do an informal survey, and what's the percentage you think of people on their phones? Very high, right? 80, 90, whatever it may be. Entire families sitting together, and I've been guilty times myself, I have to snap out of it, where the children and the parents are on the phone, not interacting, okay? So I just always remind parents and community members and adults that we have to model behaviors also with our students and kind of work with them on that level.
I love that. I mean, number one, I love to hear that the students are self-identifying the problem, because that seems like a huge step in the right direction, understanding that some of these addictive behaviors are not good for them. I mean, that's great. And I really appreciate the sort of concrete nature of your last thought, which is that we've got to be models for our kids. Like, in my house, no phones, no electronic devices allowed at the kitchen table, ever. That's our rule. I don't know if we're winning the battle there, but we're trying. But let me ask you to sort of sum up the panel a bit, or at least this first part. Dr. Quinn, if you had one piece of advice, there are a lot of parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles in this room and watching online. If there was just one thing you wish we all would do that would lead to better mental health for our kids around social media, what would that thing be? What would that piece of advice be for all of us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I too have 3 children, my oldest being 11, and, she's finally got her first phone, not too long ago, and, I think that prevention is very important. I think that if you can set those boundaries at an early age around technology, as children get older, it just becomes part of how they view technology and how they understand how to use it. And so, educating parents about how to create boundaries and how to really understand how technology can have negative effects and how they can safeguard their children from maybe getting to the point of addiction. And then I think it goes back to what you both said about modeling. I recently read a study which was very promising for me, being a parent and seeing my daughter, starting middle school and kind of going through, what comes with that is that peers have a lot of influence on our children, but actually parents have more influence on their children. This study found that parents actually do have a tremendous, impact on how their children, view the world and how they operate. So I think that, if parents can model this healthy relationship with technology, and they can do the things like you said, not having the phone at the dinner table, not having the phone at bedtime, not relying on their phone throughout their time with their children and really putting it down and connecting, then children can really see that this is how we approach technology, and a phone is we use it for certain things, but it's not a constant part of our life.
Okay, well, thank you. That is so helpful. I could talk to you both all day, but we're going to transition to our second panel. Would you please join me in thanking our panelists this morning? Okay, we are going to switch over now. So we've just dealt with the mental health piece, which, I don't know, I'm feeling pretty good. The idea that we have some control and modeling for our children, more than I think I thought I had, is making me feel good. Now we're going to transition into thinking about corporate stewardship and how the government might handle these issues and how we think of freedom of speech in this content as well. So I'd like to welcome our panelists for the next part of the panel to join me on stage. First is going to be Margaret Busse, who is the executive director. Margaret, if you'd sit right next to me. Perfect. Who's the executive director of the Utah Department of Commerce under the direction of Governor Cox. Director Busse has played a role in dealing with the social media platforms and thinking through how they should be operating. Under her key role in leadership, the Department of Commerce in Utah has published proposed rules for age verification and parent consent. Antigone, who is all the way to my left, is Meta's vice president and global head of safety. Antigone works with internal teams at Meta, but also NGOs, experts, and policymakers to ensure that Meta is thinking through how they can be a safe leader in all online activity. And Antigone also spearheads Meta's Safety Advisory Council, Global Safety Network, and several expert safety advisory groups. In between is Robert Corn-Revere. Robert just joined F.I.R.E. after 40 years of experience in First Amendment and media litigation, with 20 years as a partner at Davis Wright Tremaine. Robert is a prominent writer and thinker and advocate on free expression issues, and he has a book that was published, or a recent book at least, that was published in 2021 by Cambridge University Press, The Mind of the Censor and the Eye of the Beholder. I welcome you all to the stage. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. So Antigone, I'm going to start with you. If you could give us a sense of how Meta is thinking about this. There are obviously so many Americans and young adults that interact with your products, and you've gotten a lot of heat over the past couple of years in terms of how you might focus on their health and safety. I know you've done a lot. Would you give us an update and a sense of how Meta is thinking about this?
Yeah, I'll start with what we've been doing, but I'll also talk about something that we announced yesterday in particular. So over the last few years in particular, we've been quite focused on trying to build out tools to support both teens and their parents, because parents are a key part of this equation. So that's everything from setting teens' accounts to default private when they sign up for Instagram, to we have a sensitive content control that is defaulted when they sign up to the strictest setting, to to making it very difficult for adults that are unconnected to that minor to connect by messaging with them, making it hard to discover or search or find minors if you're an adult, and we have some particular things for suspicious accounts to ensure that they are much harder seeking to prevent them from connecting with minors. So that's a number of the tools that we've developed. In addition, we've developed tools that are designed to help kids monitor their time on the platform. So not only notifications that they can set on to monitoring their time and setting time limits for themselves, but if we see that they've been on for a long period of time, we'll nudge them to turn on those notifications to take a break. The other piece of this, though, as all of you probably know who have children, is not every child is willing to take that nudge, not even my own child for that matter. And sometimes we really need parents to help teens develop their executive functioning skills, to put some boundaries. And so we've also developed parent supervisory tools where parents can set time limits. They can set their, a time cutoff, for example, at 10 p.m. or 9 p.m. within the app. They can also see some amount of their teens' activity on the platform, who they're following, who they're friends with, who's following them, so that they can monitor. And the other piece of this is that we've set it up so that teens can set up, if they report something, their parents are also notified. So we're trying to really figure out how we build and create that connection and support that connection for parent and child within our apps. That said, this comes to sort of the announcement that we made yesterday. We really think that we need to make this simpler as an industry for parents. It is very hard. I know my daughter's now 26, but when she was 12, we first got her a phone, and she was not on these apps until she was 13. But I really did not know what I needed to do. I had no idea how the apps worked. I had no idea where their settings were. I had no idea what potential controls were there at all. And I felt incredibly overwhelmed. And I think a lot of parents, even many of the parents who are much more we would call them digital natives, are still struggling with how to set those boundaries and how to do it simply. And so we yesterday announced that we would like to see federal legislation that requires at the App Store level for parents to have the ability to approve or not approve an app that a teen downloads. This also would allow parents to verify age of their child, which is incredibly important for platforms like ours, because we are trying to build age-appropriate experiences, but if we don't have information about age, we can't do that. And by doing it at the App Store level, we don't require everybody to give their age, but to focus in on just having the age of minors, which I think is really important, and you'll hear that in some of the free speech and First Amendment issues. So making sure that parents can approve apps simply at the App Store, requiring apps to have supervisory tools, so social media apps like ours to have supervisory tools for parents, as well as actually requiring industry to develop common standards. Because one of the problems is that what one platform considers appropriate or age appropriate is not necessarily how another platform is defining it, which means that for parents, it's very hard to analyze what is happening on each app and make good decisions. And so what we are asking is for Congress to call on industry to come up with a common set of standards around what's age appropriate for teens.
Okay, wow, that's so much. Margaret, I'm gonna turn to you for a second, just reflecting on Meta's position here, but also what the state of Utah and the Department of Commerce is thinking about in this space. Can you paint a picture for us about how you think about what regulations should exist in that space, and maybe compare and contrast to what we just heard?
Yeah, thank you. And it's great to hear from Antigone and be up here with Bob and you, Vanessa. I appreciate being able to be here. So I think really what's happened in Utah is that Governor Spencer Cox recognized that social media has really perpetrated tremendous harm on our minors. You can look, there's increasing evidence that's causally related between the use of social media and teen mental health issues. There's been a tremendous spike in mental health issues amongst our youth, starting really in about 2012, when you started to have a large amount of teens that were on social media. And so this was something that was extremely concerning to Governor Cox, really to all of us in Utah and other places, obviously, because we want to protect our kids. And so, like any, I think, major product that hits our society, and it takes us a while for us to grapple with the effects of it, you have to take a multi-pronged approach. So I'm thinking about big tobacco, what happened there, and the different actions that had to be taken to kind of get to a place where people understood the harms, and then holding the companies accountable, and then opioids. We're kind of at the tail end of that, but again, trying to grapple with as a society the harms that came to our society from opioids. And so that's, I think, really where we are right now with social media. And so the biggest problem is that social media companies' business model is all about getting your kid, or you, but getting your kid to stay on the platform for as long as possible. That is their business model. And so the only way, they've made trillions of dollars doing this, and the only way to really be able to rein this is to litigate and to legislate. And then the third prong that Utah has deployed as well is to educate. So I don't know if you want me to talk about those things that we've done in Utah.
If you could give us a short summary,
Sure.
that'd be great.
So last winter, Utah became really the first state to regulate social media for minors. And that law, essentially, the components of the law are they require age verification, not how old you are, who you are, but just if you're 18 or older. And if you're not 18 or older, requires parental consent. And then it requires that if you are younger than 18, that not only do you get parental consent to have your account, but the social media company can't collect data about you, they can't target advertising to you, and there's some other things as well, but really tries to disrupt that business model for our kids. And then the second piece is the litigation. Utah sued TikTok through our department, sued TikTok October 10th, really alleging that because of these addictive features that is part of the business model, that was unconscionable and also deceptive because they've told parents and others that these platforms are safe, and they are not for our kids. And that's what we did that for TikTok. We also sued Meta a couple weeks later with these same charges. And then finally, on the education, we have a education campaign right now in Utah called socialharms.utah.gov that's trying to educate parents about the harms of social media for their kids.
So, Robert, I'm gonna come to you now. You're in the hot seat because what I'm gonna ask you is, you have on your left, you have a media company that's just described some of the things that they'd like to do to try to make sure we're operating in a safe environment. On your right, you have a state thinking through what they need to do in order to be able to create a safe environment. Obviously, differing opinions, but both attempting to think about the same issue. What makes you worried in the middle of all of this? As the defender of free speech, tell us what we should be thinking about.
Well, kind of all of the above. And Vanessa, thank you for that question. And Margaret, thank you for explaining so concisely why First Amendment lawyers like me one of the things about doing this job of protecting free speech for as long as I have is it gives you kind of a sense of perspective, and so that what we're seeing with social media now isn't the first time we've seen this kind of moral panic. I mean, you can trace it back to the 1890s, 1880s, and sort of the arguments that were made to ban dime novels, which at the time were blamed for causing most youth crime. Or in the 1930s, when states like Washington State passed laws against jazz music, saying that you could commit someone to the state insane asylum if they became jazzily confused. In the 1950s, it was Dr. Frederick Werdum, who was one of the leading psychiatrists in the country, saying that comic books were responsible for turning kids gay, turning them against authority, and turning them into juvenile delinquents. We saw the same with reactions to television, video games, and so on, usually based on inconclusive research that is then used by policymakers and described as being absolute definitive proof that now this medium, and this is more of a unique danger, almost always to our youth, and as a result passing laws that end up being declared unconstitutional. And I think we're seeing a similar pattern here. We've already seen sort of a round of litigation that happened right after the advent of the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s, that resulted in a series of decisions saying that the internet does receive full First Amendment protection. We see things happening with social media now. And by the way, I should say, as a parent, I'm not a big fan of social media. And I'm on Facebook, although I'm not of Facebook. I dabble, I would say, in social media. I grew up with managing with my kids and all of that. And so I'm not saying these things as a fan, but I think it's important to keep these issues into perspective. Obviously, there are problems going on with younger generation, Gen Z, and so on, that we need to get to the bottom of. But I think people have been jumping to the conclusion and concluding we need regulation based on very sketchy research. Take, for example, the advisories that were issued in May, one by the American Psychological Association, the other by the Surgeon General of the United States. Now, what's interesting is that the conclusions, if you read through the American Psychological Association advisory, say that using social media is not inherently beneficial or harmful to young people. Research is limited, it is tentative, there are no causal connections that have been established, and no longitudinal studies. And so it basically concluded we should study the issue more. The Surgeon General's advisory was very much the same way, but a little bit more equivocal. It basically said there's no definitive research, but maybe we should consider doing something now. And so, now naturally the headlines that followed the Surgeon General's advisory were all very moderate, you would think, saying things like, Surgeon General reaches inconclusive statements. Oh, no, I'm joking. Of course, the headlines were quite different. The New York Times said the Surgeon General warns that social media may harm children and adolescents. CNBC, U.S. Surgeon General, we need to protect kids from social media risks immediately. CBS, social media spreads extreme, inappropriate, and harmful content to adolescents, says Surgeon General. And so you see this pattern of where you have research that is moderate, or at least more cautionary, saying that you don't jump to conclusions. You then see media reports taking a much more inflammatory view of that research, and then you see policymakers saying this is conclusively established, there's a causal link, and we need to restrict this now. They do that, and usually when they overreact, they write unconstitutional legislation, and we're seeing that again.
So, I'm hearing from you throughout history, right? We see new things come and we get afraid of them because they're changing things. And then we think about how we can control them, and sometimes we have gone overboard, right? Or we've not based our actions on reliable information. The social media world now has been with us for a while. It's no longer new, right? So we are starting to see generations that are growing up as digital natives, right? That have had nothing but it. And so now I'll ask you, Antigone, to reflect on that point about the digital native piece, right? You're seeing this activity and this behavior on your platforms. How are you, getting to Margaret's point, how are you balancing the business interests and innovation against the safety concern and the fact that we know more than we did before about how kids are operating? And I'll come back to you, Robert.
So I would sort of respectfully disagree with the characterization of our business model. I think it's important to realize that if people don't feel like they're having a positive and sort of safe experience on the platform, while you may have a moment of keeping somebody engaged, you won't keep people engaged for a long period of time. So if the idea here is that it's in our business interest to have people sort of on the platform all the time incessantly, if they're not having a positive experience, they will leave. There are a lot of other choices in terms of other apps. So I think that we need to be careful in how we think about that. And in fact, we've done things to try to enable people to feel like the amount of time that they're spending is the amount of time that they want to be spending on the platform, and enabling their ability to set boundaries. For example, one of the things that we did more recently is we've put something in place called quiet mode. It enables a teen to put the app into quiet mode. It signals to anybody else who is connected to them that they're in quiet mode and that they're not interested in hearing from them. And what we did is that if the teen wants to go back and look at what was happening, they can. There's a place to do that. The reason for that is that there's sometimes people say that they might miss out on something if they're not there, and so it's harder for them to pull away. This allows them to do that. It allows them to pull away but not feel like they've missed out. So that's one way in which we're trying to address these things. I think the key here is that regardless of whether we all agree, I think certainly for us and for the state of Utah, we would like to see ways to get parents more involved, to make that simpler for them to do, to enable them to play a role. Because one of the things that we do know is that that's very helpful for teens. It's very helpful when in a good relation to create in a healthy relationship with their parent, to be able to create that guidance and to support parents who are trying to provide that guidance. And so that's what we're trying to build into our app, and it's also what we're asking federal legislators to consider, particularly because what we're seeing at the state level right now is a slew of different laws, many of them in conflict with each other, which leaves parents essentially in the same place at the end. Inconsistency, not giving their information to every single app, because that's how they have to verify age, as opposed to having one place to do it that's more privacy protective.
So, Margaret, I have to imagine you agree that you'd like parents to be more active, both as role models and watching what their kids are doing. I suspect that you feel that that's not sufficient. Am I correct? And do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I would just say, first of all, that one of the features of the legislation that was passed in Utah is to require parental consent to get on the platforms. So it very much is about empowering parents to be involved, to Antigone's point. And I do think that, Antigone said that people will get off if they're not having a good experience. Obviously, one of the things that happens, though, is that you have this FOMO. And you're a kid, you're a teen, and everyone else is on it. And so what do? And that's why you see very high rates of teens themselves saying that something needs to be done with social media, if you ask them. But if they're the only ones not to be on the app, that's tough. Or the only ones to not have, to have parental controls and those kinds of things, that's tough. And then I would also just say that, the nature of our lawsuit, to Bob's point, is actually not about the content or the freedom of expression. It is about the addictive features that social media platforms employ, and it's about the deceptive nature, saying it's safe and it's not. So we are not getting into, in my view, free expression issues. We are saying the features of the product are addictive and harmful, and that the product has been deceptive. And so I think that's really the fundamental point that we're making in these allegations.
Robert, would you like to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a sort of a common defense that states are making. They're not really regulating speech, they're regulating a product. And when the product is speech, then it's hard to square that circle. That was the argument that California made, for example, in defending the Age-Appropriate Design Act, which, in full disclosure, I was part of the team challenging that law, which was enjoined in September. It's on appeal, we'll see what happens. But again, that's the argument that's being made. We're not regulating speech, we're not censors, we're just regulating a product. And that really doesn't, I don't think it survives First Amendment scrutiny. The thing about
just to be clear, though, I was talking about our lawsuits, I was talking about our lawsuits. Oh, okay. Yeah, not the regulation.
No, I understand okay. The civil lawsuit is going forward, and the same arguments will be made, and these are arguments that are ongoing. We'll see how the courts react to them. There are, in a separate context, 3 different sets of cases that are going to be in front of the Supreme Court this term that will clarify, to a great degree, I think, the continuing First Amendment protections for internet speech in general. That will then have an effect on whether or not states can try to characterize the products of the internet as something other than speech.
Well, we've gotten to the end of our time for the panel, but I just want to sum up by saying 2 things. One is I'm very, very grateful for all of you on the panel, because part of the insights that you've provided and even your disagreements demonstrate to me, how complex this issue is, how great it is that we have so many people thinking through what this means, what regulations might be possible, what those regulations might mean in terms of free speech, the obligation of the technology channels to think about these things. It is really hard, but the one thing we heard from the first panel and this panel is what we can do as parents. So I'm gonna sort of cling to that and be grateful that there are so many smart people thinking through these issues, and we can try to make sure we end up in a better place in the years to come. So we can continue this conversation in the crowd and throughout the rest of the day. I hope you will join me in thanking our panel for today. Thank you.